That morning, my daughter hit me across the face because I refused to sign over my life savings. I did not fight back. I did not call the police immediately. Instead, I wiped the blood from my cheek and promised to cook her a special dinner that very evening. She smiled, thinking she had finally broken the old man. She had no idea that while she was planning how to spend my money, I was preparing a main course, served with a side of cold, hard justice. And when the doorbell rang that evening, her smile vanished forever. My name is Harrison Wells. I am 70 years old. I spent 40 years as a forensic accountant, hunting down white-collar criminals who thought they were smarter than the system. I have stared down embezzlers in high-rise corner offices and testified against fraudsters who stole millions from pension funds. But the most dangerous criminals I ever faced were not strangers. They were standing right in front of me in my own kitchen in Connecticut, wearing the clothes I bought them and demanding my signature. If you have ever felt like the people you love are the ones holding the knife behind your back, please hit the like button. It helps share this story. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from. It started on a Tuesday morning. The sunlight was streaming through the bay windows of the breakfast nook, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It should have been a peaceful morning. I was drinking my coffee black, just the way I have for 50 years, trying to enjoy the silence. But silence is a luxury I have not had in months. Not since my daughter Victoria and her husband Greg moved back in with me. They said it was temporary. They said they were between houses. That was 6 months ago. Sign the papers, Dad. It is not a request. Victoria screamed, slamming a thick manila folder onto the marble countertop. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. I flinched, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of it. The document was titled, Durable Power of Attorney. If I signed it, I would effectively hand over control of every asset, every bank account, and every decision to my daughter. I looked at her, my little girl. She is 38 years old now, but in that moment, she looked like a stranger. She was wearing a silk blouse and holding a Hermes handbag that looked brand new. Her eyes were manic desperate. I put my coffee cup down slowly. I made sure my hand did not shake. I wanted them to see strength, not the frailty they were counting on. I am not signing that, Victoria, I said calmly. I am 70, not senile. I manage my own portfolio. I pay the bills for this house. I pay for the groceries you eat. I even pay for your son Leo's private school tuition because you claimed you were short on cash this semester. You are being difficult, she yelled, pacing back and forth in her high heels, scuffing my hardwood floors. We are trying to help you. There is an investment opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime deal in real estate. But we need liquidity by tonight. You have almost $1 million sitting in your retirement account doing nothing. It is selfish. Selfish. The word hung in the air. I looked over at the refrigerator. Greg, my son-in-law, was leaning against the stainless steel, casually scrolling on his phone. He did not look up. He did not defend me. He just chewed his gum and tapped his foot nervously. I adjusted my glasses and pointed a finger at the handbag resting on the table. You need liquidity, Victoria? Or do you need $50,000 because your credit cards are maxed out again? She stopped pacing. Her eyes narrowed. How do you know about my credit cards? I'm a forensic accountant. Victoria. I investigate fraud for a living. Or I used to. Old habits die hard. I saw the late notices in the mail. And that bag. That Hermes Birkin bag you are parading around. I picked up the bag. It felt heavy. Too heavy. It is a very good replica, I said, examining the stitching. High-grade leather. But the hardware is wrong. The stamp is a millimeter too high. You paid maybe $500 for this to impress your friends at the club while pretending it cost $20,000. You are living a lie, Victoria, and you want me to fund it. Her face went from flushed to pale, then to a terrifying shade of crimson. The mask of the concerned daughter slipped completely. I saw the rage underneath. The entitlement. The desperation of a woman who has drowned herself in debt to maintain an image. "You think you are so smart?" she hissed. "You think you are better than us because you hoarded your money while Mom died. Do not bring your mother into this." I warned, my voice dropping an octave. She did not speak. She moved, fast. Her hand lashed out before I could even process what was happening. The sound was sickeningly loud. A sharp, stinging pain exploded across my left cheek. The force of the blow knocked my glasses off my face and sent them skittering across the floor. I stumbled back, gripping the counter for support. I felt a hot, wet sensation trickling down my jaw. I reached up and touched my face. My fingers came away red. Her engagement ring, a 2-carat diamond solitaire that I had paid for when she married Greg, had sliced my skin. My own daughter had struck me, in my own home. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and my own ragged breathing. I looked at Victoria. She was breathing hard, her hand still raised, her chest heaving. For a second, I thought she might apologize. I thought she might be horrified by what she had done. But she just stared at me with cold, dead eyes. "See what you made me do," she whispered. "You push and you push." I looked past her to Greg. Surely he would step in now. Surely he would have some scrap of decency. Greg finally looked up from his phone. He saw the blood running down my face. He saw his wife trembling with rage. He smirked. "Just sign the damn papers, old man," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Don't make her hit you again. You are bleeding on the floor. It is gross. Clean yourself up." In that split second, something inside me broke. But it wasn't my spirit. It was my attachment to them. The illusion of family shattered like glass. I wasn't looking at my daughter and son-in-law anymore. I was back in the interrogation room. I was looking at 2 suspects who had just crossed the line from greed to physical assault. My heart was breaking, but my mind was sharpening. The fog of paternal love lifted. I saw them clearly for the first time. They were predators, and I was the prey. If I fought back now, they would claim I was violent. They would say I attacked her first. They were younger, stronger, and there were 2 of them. They would use any resistance to have me committed to a facility. I could see the plan forming in their eyes. I needed time. I needed evidence. And most of all, I needed them to believe they had won. I lowered my head. I let my shoulders slump, exaggerating the curve of my spine. I touched the cut on my face and looked at the blood on my fingertips with wide, fearful eyes. I made my hands tremble visibly. I am sorry," I stammered, making my voice crack and sound thin. "I don't know what I was thinking. I am just so confused lately. My memory, it is not what it used to be. I shouldn't have upset you, Victoria." Victoria blinked, surprised by my sudden surrender. She exchanged a look with Greg. I saw the triumphant gleam in his eyes. They bought it. They thought the slap had scared me into submission. She stepped forward, offering me a paper towel from the roll. Not to help me, but to protect her precious papers from bloodstains. "Good," she said softly, her voice dripping with fake sweetness that made my stomach turn. "That is better, Dad. We just want what is best for you. The doctor said you are showing signs of decline. You need us to take control, to protect you from scammers." The irony was bitter. The scammers were standing in my kitchen, drinking my coffee. I took the paper towel and pressed it to my cheek, wincing. "You are right," I whispered, looking down at the floor. "I am tired. I just need to rest. I will sign it. Just let me rest for a few hours. I will sign everything tonight after dinner." Victoria smiled. It was a predator's smile. Tonight, she agreed. "Make sure you do. We will have a nice dinner. We can celebrate." I shuffled out of the kitchen, dragging my feet, acting every bit the defeated old man they wanted to see. I heard Greg chuckle as I left the room. Finally, he muttered, I thought he'd never crack. I walked slowly down the hallway past the family photos that lined the walls. Photos of Victoria graduating. Photos of her wedding. Photos that now felt like lies. I went into my bedroom and closed the door. I locked it. I moved to the bathroom and turned on the faucet, letting the water run loud to mask any sound. I looked in the mirror. The cut on my cheek was deep, an angry red line against my pale skin. My eyes were not fearful anymore. They were cold, calculating. I reached under the heavy porcelain lid of the toilet tank. Taped there inside a waterproof bag was a burner phone, a cheap prepaid device I had bought 3 weeks ago when I first started noticing money missing from my wallet. My hands were steady now. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Patty," I said, when the voice on the other end answered. "It is Harrison. Activate Protocol 4. They just crossed the line. I was assaulted." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Patricia O'Connell, my attorney for 30 years, and my shark in a suit didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Are you safe, Harrison?" "Do I need to send the police now?" "No," I said, staring at my bloody reflection. "Not yet. If the police come now, it is a domestic dispute." He said, she said. "I need to bury them, Patty. I need irrefutable proof. I need to know exactly how much debt Greg is in. I need to know who he owes, and I need it by 5 o'clock. "Consider it done," Patty said. "Harrison, are you sure you can handle this?" I touched the cut on my face again. The sting was a reminder, a fuel. "I am going to cook them dinner, Patty. A very special dinner. Just get me those files." I hung up and hid the phone again. I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. They thought I was napping. They thought I was broken. But I was just waiting. The game had just begun, and I had the first move. Before I tell you what I found on my son-in-law's computer while they thought I was asleep, please subscribe to the channel. You are not going to want to miss what happens next. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock at the bedroom door. I did not answer. I lay still on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead. The lock clicked. Of course she had a key. It was my house, but in her mind, it was already her inheritance, and she was just waiting for the reading of the will. Victoria slipped into the room. She was holding a plastic bag filled with ice wrapped in a kitchen towel. Her face had changed completely. The manic rage was gone, wiped clean as if it never happened. In its place was a look of exaggerated concern, the kind you see on bad soap actors. It was terrifying how quickly she could switch masks. She sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. I stiffened, but I forced myself to remain passive. I let my eyes drift to her, vacant and confused. "Oh, Dad," she sighed, her voice soft and trembling. "Look at what you did to yourself." She reached out and gently pressed the cold towel against my throbbing cheek. The ice stung, but the words stung more. "Look at what I did to myself." That is the first rule of the manipulator. Never take responsibility. Always shift the blame to the victim. "I am sorry," I whispered, keeping my voice low and raspy. "I didn't mean to make you angry, Victoria." She shushed me, stroking my arm with her free hand. Her nails were painted a perfect crimson. "I know, Dad. I know you didn't mean it. It is just that you have been so difficult lately. You get confused. You forget things. You become aggressive over nothing." She paused, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. Then she dropped the lie she had been rehearsing. "I spoke to Dr. Evans yesterday, Dad. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to scare you, but he is very concerned. He said the signs of dementia are progressing faster than we thought. That is why you are so paranoid about your money. That is why you think we are trying to hurt you. It is the disease talking." I looked into her eyes. My brown eyes. Her mother's shape. I searched for a shred of guilt, a flicker of hesitation. There was nothing. Just a flat, shark-like determination. She was gaslighting me. She was trying to rewrite my reality to convince me that my sanity was slipping away so that she could step in as the benevolent guardian. It was a strategy as old as time. Isolate the victim, make them doubt their own mind, and then take control. "You really think I am sick?" I asked, widening my eyes in mock fear. She nodded sadly. "I do, Dad. And it breaks my heart. That is why I need you to sign those papers tonight. Not for me, but for you. If you sign the power of attorney, I can handle the bills and the investments. You won't have to worry about numbers anymore. You won't have to get confused and angry. You can just rest." I looked away from her, feigning shame. Inside, my mind was racing. I wasn't seeing a daughter anymore. I was seeing a case study. In the FBI Academy, I used to teach a concept called the fraud triangle. To commit a financial crime, a perpetrator needs 3 things: pressure, opportunity, and rationalization. I lay there analyzing my own child through that lens. Pressure. That was obvious. The debts, the fake designer bags, the keeping up with the neighbors. Victoria and Greg were drowning financially. They needed a lifeline, and they needed it fast. Opportunity. That was me. An old man living alone, grieving his wife, trusting his family. I was the open vault door. And rationalization. That was the most dangerous part. That was what I was hearing right now. She didn't see herself as a thief. She told herself she was helping me. She told herself I was sick. She told herself she deserved the money because she had put up with me. She had rationalized the crime until it felt like an act of mercy. I let out a long, shaky sigh. "Okay," I said, closing my eyes. "I understand. You are right, Victoria. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to get worse." She squeezed my hand. "You are not a burden, Dad. We love you. We just want to protect you. Just rest now. Sleep for a few hours. When you wake up, we will have a nice dinner, and we can sign the papers, and everything will be better." She stood up, leaving the ice pack on my bedside table. "I will close the door," she whispered. "Sleep well." As soon as the latch clicked shut, I opened my eyes. The confusion vanished. I sat up and listened. I heard her footsteps retreating down the hall. I heard her go into the kitchen and say something to Greg. Then I heard laughter. They were celebrating. They thought the gaslighting had worked. They thought the old man was broken. I moved quietly off the bed. My joints ached, but the adrenaline was masking the pain. I needed to make a call, and I couldn't risk them listening on the house line or standing outside the door. I went into the ensuite bathroom. I turned on the faucet in the sink full blast. Then I turned on the shower. The noise of rushing water filled the small tiled space, creating a sound barrier. I reached for the burner phone I had hidden. I sat on the closed toilet lid and dialed Patricia's number again. 1 ring, 2 rings. "Go for Patty," she answered, crisp and professional. "It is me," I said, keeping my voice low under the sound of the water. "We are moving to the next phase." "Did you get the file on the debts?" she asked. "I am about to check the email," I said. "But Patty, I need you to activate Protocol Omega." There was a pause on the line. Protocol Omega was a term we used jokingly years ago for the nuclear option, the total scorched earth policy. It meant we weren't just looking for a defense, we were looking for an indictment. "Harrison," she said, her voice dropping the business tone. "Are you sure? Once we pull that thread, there is no going back. Protocol Omega means we bring in law enforcement. It means criminal charges. These are your children." I looked in the bathroom mirror. I touched the bandage on my cheek. I thought about the lie Victoria had just told me about my own mind. She was willing to erase my identity to get to my wallet. "They are not my children anymore, Patty," I said coldly. "They are hostiles. Activate it. I want a full forensic deep dive into Greg Bennett's financials. I want to know who he owes and how much. I want to know if he has touched any other accounts. And Patty, get Captain Reynolds on the line. Tell him I might have a situation tonight involving elder abuse and fraud. Understood, Patty said. I will call Reynolds. He owes you a favor anyway from that pension fund case back in '98. I will have the dossier on Greg sent to your secure email in 10 minutes. Harrison, be careful. If Greg is in deep with loan sharks, he might be desperate. Desperate men make mistakes, I said. I am counting on it. I hung up the phone and powered it down. I sat there for a moment listening to the water run. I was about to destroy my family. I was about to send the people I raised to prison. A normal father would be weeping. A normal father would be heartbroken. But I wasn't feeling heartbreak. I was feeling the cold clarity of the investigation. The fraud triangle was complete. The crime was in progress, and I was the only witness who could stop it. I stood up, turned off the shower and then the sink. I splashed some cold water on my face to look groggy and disoriented in case they checked on me. Then I hid the phone again. It was time to see just how deep the rot went. I needed to get to Greg's computer. I needed to see the numbers. Numbers never lie, people do. And if my instincts were right, the numbers on Greg's screen were going to tell me a story that would put him away for a long time. I opened the bathroom door, shuffled back to the bed, and waited for the house to go quiet. The hunt was on. I lay under the heavy duvet, waiting for the vibration. My tablet was hidden beneath the pillow, its screen brightness turned all the way down. The house was quiet now, but it was a heavy silence, the kind that hangs in the air before a thunderstorm breaks. I could hear the distant hum of the pool pump outside, and the occasional creak of the house settling. 10 minutes had passed since I hung up with Patty. Then I felt it. A short, sharp buzz against my hand. I pulled the tablet under the blanket, creating a small tent of darkness. I unlocked it with my thumbprint. The blue light illuminated my face and I squinted, adjusting my reading glasses. There was one new email in my secure folder. The subject line was blank. I opened the attachment. It was a preliminary forensic summary on Gregory Bennett. Patty had moved mountains in minutes. She had accessed credit reports, court filings, and thanks to her connections in the banking sector, she had flagged suspicious wire transfers. I scanned the numbers. My eyes narrowed. I had expected bad financial management. I had expected maxed-out credit cards and maybe a car loan they couldn't afford. I was prepared for incompetence. I was not prepared for this. The report showed a series of cash withdrawals from their joint account over the last 6 months. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. All in cash. All untraceable once it left the bank. But the real smoking gun was a lien search. Greg had taken out a high-interest title loan on his car. He had defaulted on 3 different microloans. Then I saw the note Patty had appended to the bottom of the file. It was highlighted in red. Harrison. We found a digital footprint on a server linked to an offshore gambling syndicate based in Costa Rica. The account associated with Greg's email is currently showing a negative balance of $212,000. The debt has been sold to a local collection agency in New Jersey known for aggressive enforcement. The agency is a front for the Russo organization. I let the tablet rest on my chest. I stared up at the dark fabric of the duvet. $200,000. Greg wasn't just bad with money. He was a degenerate gambler. He had gambled away their savings, he had gambled away their credit, and now he was gambling with my life. I understood the timeline now. The urgency. The violence. Bookies at this level do not send polite letters. They do not report you to the credit bureau. They send men with baseball bats. They break knees. They burn down houses. The deadline wasn't arbitrary. The collectors were likely breathing down his neck right now. If he didn't pay by a certain date, they would hurt him. Or worse, they would hurt Victoria. Or Leo. My blood ran cold. My grandson was sleeping down the hall in a house targeted by organized crime. I shut off the tablet and hid it back inside the pillowcase. I couldn't just lie there anymore. I needed to see him. I needed to gauge his state of mind. A man in that kind of hole is volatile. He is a cornered animal. I slid out of bed. My arthritic knees popped audibly, and I froze, holding my breath. Silence. Good. I didn't put on my slippers. I needed to be silent. I walked in my socks across the carpet, opening the bedroom door with the care of a bomb disposal technician. The hallway was dimly lit by a nightlight near the stairs. I crept forward. I could hear a low murmur coming from the study down the hall. That used to be my study. Now it was Greg's man cave, a place where he played video games and apparently ruined our livs. The door was cracked open about 2 inches. A sliver of light cut across the dark hallway floor. I pressed my back against the wall, breathing shallowly. I inched closer until I was right beside the doorframe. I could hear the pacing. Greg was walking back and forth, his footsteps heavy and erratic. He was talking, but his voice was a hushed, frantic whisper. "Please listen to me," he was saying. I know what I said." There was a pause. He was listening to someone on the other end. I could hear the tinny sound of shouting coming from the phone, but I couldn't make out the words. "No, you don't understand," Greg pleaded. His voice cracked. "It is done. The old man," he agreed. "He is signing the power of attorney tonight. I swear, I will have access to the accounts by tomorrow morning. I can wire the first 50,000 by noon." Another pause. Longer this time. I wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead. This was it. The confirmation. He wasn't just waiting for an inheritance, he was actively selling my assets to save his own skin. "Yeah," Greg said, and now he sounded like he was crying. "Yeah, the liquid assets are substantial. He has a retirement fund. He has the house. The house alone covers the whole debt. We are listing it next week." I clenched my fists. They were selling my home. The home I built with my wife. The home where we raised Victoria. They were going to liquidate 40 years of memories to pay off a gambling debt. Suddenly, Greg stopped pacing. His voice dropped to a terrifying whisper. "Don't say that. Please don't say that. Leave Victoria out of this. She doesn't know about you guys. Look, I promised you the money. Don't touch my wife. If you come near this house." He stopped. The person on the other end must have hung up or issued a final threat. I heard the sound of a phone being thrown onto a desk, then a heavy thud like a fist hitting a wall. Greg let out a low, guttural groan of pure despair. "Oh God," he moaned. "Oh God, what have I done?" I stayed frozen against the wall. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This changed the tactical landscape completely. Greg wasn't just a greedy son-in-law. He was a man with a gun to his head. The people he owed were threatening violence against my daughter. I felt a flash of old paternal instinct. I wanted to burst into the room, grab him by the collar, and ask him how he could be so stupid. I wanted to save Victoria. But then I remembered the slap. I remembered the cold look in Victoria's eyes when she hit me. She wasn't an innocent bystander. She was an accomplice. She might not know about the bookies, but she knew about the scheme to steal my money. She knew about the plan to put me in a home. Greg was dangerous because he was desperate, but Victoria was dangerous because she was cold. I couldn't confront him now. If I walked in there and told him I knew about the debt, he would panic. A man terrified for his life might do anything. He might try to force me to sign immediately. He might hurt me, or he might just take Leo and run. I needed to be smarter. I needed to close the trap before they realized they were in it. I backed away from the door, step by agonizing step. I retreated down the hallway, my mind racing. I had to speed up the timeline. I couldn't wait days. I couldn't wait until next week. It had to happen tonight. The dinner. The confrontation. The police. I needed to separate Greg from Victoria. I needed to get them in a room where they felt safe and then pull the rug out from under them. And I needed to make sure that when the police arrived, they understood this wasn't a family squabble. This was criminal fraud and extortion. I reached my bedroom and slipped inside, locking the door quietly behind me. I leaned against the wood, my legs trembling. $200,000. The number floated in the darkness. I went back to the bed and sat down. I looked at the clock on the nightstand. It was 2 p.m. I had 3 hours before dinner, 3 hours to prepare the meal, 3 hours to set the stage. I needed one more piece of evidence. The debt was the motive, but I needed the crime. I needed proof of what they had already done, not just what they planned to do. I remembered the summer house in Florida. We hadn't been there in 2 years since my wife got sick. But Greg had gone down there 3 months ago. He said he was going to fix the roof, check for hurricane damage. My eyes widened in the dark room. He had been gone for a week. He had access to my filing cabinet where I kept the deeds. If Greg had forged my signature on a mortgage or a lien, that was a federal crime. That was bank fraud. That was the nail in the coffin. I dialed the number for the bank branch in Sarasota. I cleared my throat, practicing my impression of Greg's nasal, entitled voice. "Hello," I said, when the automated system connected me to a representative. "This is Greg Bennett, calling on behalf of Harrison Wells. I am just checking on the status of the loan we discussed." I held my breath, waiting to see if my hunch was right. Waiting to see if my son-in-law had already sold pieces of my life to pay for his sins. The game was escalating, and I was about to find the weapon that would end it. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the burner phone in my hand. The confirmation of the bank fraud in Florida was a heavy blow. But my instincts, the ones honed over 40 years of hunting criminals, were screaming that I was still missing something. Fraud is usually a means to an end. Greg needed money to pay his debts, yes. But why the rush to institutionalize me? Why the specific mention of sedation? If they just wanted to sell the house, they could forge my signature on the deed, just like they did with the mortgage. Sending me away was risky, unless I was worth more to them dead or incapacitated than I was alive. A thought struck me cold. Life insurance. I had a policy, a standard one. But Greg had been asking questions about it months ago, helping me organize my files. I needed to see his computer. I needed to see what he was looking at when he thought I was asleep. I checked the time. 5:45. Greg was outside smoking on the patio. Victoria was in the bath. This was my only chance. I slipped out of my room. My socks made no sound on the hardwood floor. The house felt like a minefield. Every creak of a floorboard could betray me. I moved past the bathroom door, hearing the splash of water. Safe. I reached the guest room they used as an office. The door was ajar. I pushed it open and slipped inside, leaving it exactly as I found it. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and nervous sweat. Greg's laptop was open on the desk, the screen dark. I tapped the spacebar. It lit up, asking for a password. I didn't panic. People like Greg are predictable. They are narcissists. I tried his birthday. Nothing. I tried Victoria's name. Nothing. Then I thought about what he loved most. Not his wife. Not his son. His vices. I typed in Blackjack 21. Access granted. I didn't waste time gloating. I went straight to the browser history. It was a cesspool of gambling sites and forum posts about bankruptcy. But then I saw it. A search query from 3 days ago. Accelerated death benefits dementia. Average life expectancy after sedation. Apex life insurance payout timeline. My hands started to shake. I clicked on his email tab. There was a draft folder. I opened it. There was an email addressed to an insurance agent. It wasn't sent yet, but the intent was clear. My father-in-law is being admitted to a long-term care facility tomorrow. His condition has deteriorated rapidly. We expect a diagnosis of permanent cognitive failure within the week. Please prepare the paperwork for the accelerated benefit rider we discussed. We will need the $2 million payout expedited. $2 million. They weren't just stealing the house. They were cashing me in. They had taken out a rider on my policy, or forged a new one betting that if they could get a doctor to declare me a vegetable, they could access the death benefit while I was still breathing. That is why they needed Shady Pines. That is why they needed the drugs. They needed to turn a healthy man into a vegetable to collect the insurance. I pulled out my burner phone and snapped pictures of the screen. My heart was pounding so hard I felt dizzy. This was conspiracy to commit murder, or close enough to it. Suddenly I heard the patio door slide open downstairs. Greg was coming in. I froze. I was on the second floor. My room was on the first. There was no way to get down the stairs without him seeing me. The footsteps were heavy coming toward the stairs. Click, clack, click, clack. He was coming up. I looked around the room frantically. The window, no too high. Under the bed. Too cliché, and I would never get up in time. The closet. It was a walk-in closet filled with their winter coats and boxes of junk they hadn't unpacked. I scrambled inside, pulling the door shut until it was just a hair's breadth from closing. I buried myself behind a row of heavy wool coats, pressing my back against the wall. I held my breath, forcing my lungs to be still. The office door creaked open. Greg walked in. I could see him through the crack in the door. He looked erratic. He was muttering to himself, rubbing his face with both hands. "Come on, come on, come on," he whispered. He sat down at the desk. I heard the tap of keys. He was checking the laptop. If he checked the browser history, if he noticed the timestamp on the last activity, I would be dead. A 70-year-old man against a desperate debtor in a soundproof house. Please God, I prayed silently. Just let him be stupid. Greg groaned. He picked up his phone and dialed. "Yeah, it is me," he said, his voice trembling. "No, listen. The plan is solid. We are doing the dinner. He thinks it is a celebration." "Yeah. I will drive him myself." Midnight. He paused, listening. "No, I won't mess it up. The doctor is ready." "Good. Look, I need that insurance money to clear fast. If those guys from Jersey come back..." He stopped. He listened again. I know. No witnesses. Just make sure the dose is right. I don't want him waking up in the car." My blood turned to ice. No witnesses. Greg stood up. He started pacing the room, coming closer and closer to the closet. I gripped the burner phone in my pocket, ready to use it as a weapon if I had to. I wasn't going down without a fight. He stopped right in front of the closet door. I could see his shoes. I could hear his ragged breathing. He reached out. I saw his hand grasp the doorknob. He was going to open it. "Victoria!" he yelled suddenly, turning his head toward the hallway. "Are you out of the bath yet?" I heard Victoria's muffled voice from the bathroom. "What, I am drying off. We need to start getting ready," Greg yelled back, letting go of the doorknob. "The old man is cooking something. We have to keep him happy until 8. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving the laptop open. I waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds. I pushed the closet door open and slipped out. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced them to move. I crept to the door and peeked into the hallway. Greg was in their bedroom now, arguing with Victoria about a shirt. I moved. I moved faster than I had in 20 years. I ghosted down the stairs, skipping the step that always creaked. I made it to the ground floor. I slipped into my bedroom and locked the door. I leaned against the wood, gasping for air. My chest heaved. I was alive. I was undetected. And now I had the final piece of the puzzle. The motive that tied it all together. The insurance fraud. I looked at the mirror. The fear was gone. The shock was gone. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was the angel of death. And I was about to serve judgment. I took the burner phone out and sent the photos of the emails to Patty. Add this to the pile, I texted. Life insurance fraud. Conspiracy. Get the DA ready. Then I washed my face. I put on my best shirt. I rolled up my sleeves. I walked out of my room and headed for the kitchen. I walked past the living room where Greg was now sitting, pretending to read a magazine. He looked up at me, nervous sweat shining on his forehead. "Hey, Harrison," he said. "You okay?" I stopped. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the fear. I saw the greed. I saw the man who had just discussed my overdose on the phone. "I am better than okay, Greg," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I am hungry." I walked into the kitchen. The ingredients for the beef Wellington were waiting. The knife was waiting. It was time to cook. I sat in the dim light of the bedroom, my hand still resting on the burner phone. The silence in the house was heavy, suffocating. I was still processing the possibility that my son-in-law had forged my signature on a mortgage when I heard the heavy oak front door creak open downstairs. It was 3:30. The school bus had just dropped off Leo. For the first time all day, a genuine warmth spread through my chest. Leo. My grandson. He was the only innocent party in this house of cards. He was 10 years old with messy hair and eyes that saw too much. He was the reason I hadn't kicked Victoria and Greg out months ago. I wanted him to have stability. I wanted him to have a home. I stood up, ignoring the pop in my knees, and moved toward the bedroom door. I wanted to see him. I wanted to hug him and smell the fresh air on his clothes and pretend for just a moment that we were a normal family. But before I could turn the handle, I heard Victoria's voice. It wasn't the sweet, manipulative tone she used on me. It was sharp, anxious, and commanding. "Leo, stop right there. Do not go down that hallway." I froze, my hand hovering over the brass knob. I pressed my ear against the wood. Why, Mom? Leo's voice was small, confused. "I want to show Grandpa my math test. I got an A." "You can't bother Grandpa right now, Leo. We talked about this. Grandpa he is sick." "Sick? Does he have a cold?" "No, honey. It is his brain. He is confused. He is having an episode. Remember what I told you? When people get old like him, they change. He might not know who you are. He might get angry. He could hurt you, Leo." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The physical slap this morning was nothing compared to this. She was poisoning him against me. She was planting fear in the one person I loved more than anything. She was turning me into a monster in his eyes to justify locking me away. "He won't hurt me," Leo protested, but his voice wavered. "Grandpa loves me." "He doesn't know what he is doing anymore," Victoria snapped, losing patience. "He hit me this morning, Leo. Look at my face. He attacked me." "Liar." I mouthed the word in the darkness. She was using the cut on my cheek caused by her own ring to frame me. It was masterful. It was evil. I heard Leo gasp. "Go to your room," Victoria ordered. "Stay there until dinner, and lock the door. Do not let him in if he comes knocking. Do you understand? It is for your own safety." I heard the sound of sneakers running up the stairs, then a door slamming shut. I backed away from my door, my hands trembling with a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. They weren't just stealing my money. They were stealing my legacy. They were stealing my relationship with my grandson. They wanted him to remember me not as the man who taught him to fish, but as the violent, senile old man who had to be sent away. I sat back down on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. I felt trapped. If I went out there to defend myself, she would scream. She would call the police and say I was having an outburst. It would play right into her narrative. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my breathing. I needed to stick to the plan. Dinner. The evidence, the police. Suddenly I heard a scratching sound. It was coming from behind me, from the window. My bedroom is on the ground floor, a master suite I had built years ago so my late wife wouldn't have to climb stairs. Outside the window was a thick row of hydrangea bushes. The scratching came again. Then the sash began to slide up slowly, inch by inch. I watched, mesmerized. A small pair of hands gripped the sill. Then a head of messy brown hair appeared. Leo. He pulled himself up, grunting with effort, and tumbled over the sill, landing on the carpet with a soft thud. He was wearing his school uniform, his knees stained with grass. He looked terrified, glancing at the bedroom door to make sure it was locked. Leo. I whispered, hurrying over to him. What are you doing? You shouldn't be here. If your mother finds you... He scrambled up and put a finger to his lips. His eyes were wide, filled with tears. He looked at the bandage on my face. He reached out a hesitant hand, but pulled it back, remembering his mother's lie. Did you hit Mom? He whispered. I grabbed his shoulders gently, forcing him to look at me. No, Leo. I would never hit her, and I would never hurt you. Do you believe me? He searched my face. He saw the grandfather who had built him a treehouse. He saw the man who snuck him candy when his parents weren't looking. He nodded slowly, and the fear began to drain out of him. I believe you, Grandpa. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was folded into a tiny square. I heard them talking last night, he said, his voice barely audible. After you went to bed, they thought I was asleep. They were drinking wine and laughing. He pressed the paper into my hand. I drew this so I wouldn't forget the name. I unfolded the paper. It was a drawing done in crayon. Crude but chillingly accurate. It showed a large boxy building with bars on the windows. Next to it was a van, and on the side of the van he had written 2 words in block letters. Shady Pines. I stared at the drawing. I knew Shady Pines. It wasn't a retirement community. It wasn't a luxury facility. It was a state-subsidized dumping ground for the indigent and the unclaimed. It was a place known for bed sores, over-medication, and neglect. It was where you sent people you wanted to forget. It is a bad place, isn't it? Grandpa Leo asked, watching my reaction. Why did you draw this, Leo? What did they say? Leo took a step closer, whispering as if the walls had ears. Mom said that after you sign the papers tonight, the papers about the money, she is going to call the van. She said they are coming tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock while you are sleeping. She said they are going to give you a shot so you won't wake up until you get there. He started to cry, silent tears tracking through the dirt on his face. She said, "It is a long vacation, Grandpa." But she laughed when she said it. Dad said, once you are gone, they can sell the house and buy a boat. Grandpa, please don't go. I don't want you to go to Shady Pines. I crushed the paper in my hand. My knuckles turned white. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The urgency wasn't just about the debt. It was about disposal. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to erase me. They were planning to drug me, kidnap me, and stash me in a hellhole while they liquidated 40 years of my hard work. It was premeditated. It was cruel. It was evil. The last vestige of hesitation left me. The father who wanted to protect his daughter died in that moment. In his place stood the forensic accountant, the investigator, the man who had put away criminals far smarter and tougher than Victoria and Greg. I dropped to one knee, ignoring the pain. I pulled Leo into a hug, burying my face in his small shoulder. He smelled like grass and pencil shavings. He was shaking. "I am not going anywhere, Leo," I said, my voice hard as steel. "Not to Shady Pines. Not anywhere." I pulled back and looked him in the eye. I needed him to be strong. I needed him to be safe. "Leo, tonight is going to be a little scary. There is going to be a dinner, and there might be some yelling. Maybe even the police will come." "The police?" His eyes went round. "Yes. But they are the good guys. They are friends of Grandpa. Listen to me very carefully. I need you to do a very important job. Can you do that for me?" He nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "Yes, Grandpa. I need you to be a knight, like in your storybooks. I need you to go to your room, lock the door, and put on your headphones. You play your video games as loud as you want. And no matter what you hear, no matter who knocks, you do not open that door until I come and get you. Can you promise me that?" "But Mom..." "No. Only me. Or a police officer in a uniform. Do you understand?" He nodded solemnly. "I promise." "Good boy. Now you have to go back out the window. Be a ninja. Don't let them see you." I helped him climb back over the sill. He paused for a second, looking back at me. "Grandpa, are you going to get the bad guys?" I touched the cut on my cheek. I thought about the forged mortgage. I thought about Shady Pines. "Yes, Leo," I said. "I am going to get them all." I watched him disappear into the bushes. I slid the window shut and locked it. I turned back to the room. The crumpled drawing of Shady Pines lay on the bed. I picked it up and smoothed it out. I folded it carefully and placed it in my pocket next to the burner phone. Evidence. They wanted to send me on a vacation, fine. I would send them on one first. A very long vacation to a state facility. But mine would have bars on the windows and guards at the doors. I looked at the clock. 5 o'clock. It was time to cook. I walked to the closet and pulled out my best shirt. It was old, but it was clean. I buttoned it up all the way to the top. I rolled up the sleeves. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I was the chef. And tonight's special was beef Wellington, a dish that requires patience, precision, and a very sharp knife. I opened the bedroom door and walked out into the hallway. I didn't shuffle this time. I walked with purpose. The floorboards creaked under my weight, announcing my arrival. I was done hiding. It was time to feed the wolves. I stood in the center of the bedroom, listening to the silence of the house. The drawing of Shady Pines was burning a hole in my pocket. My grandson was safe for now, locked in his room with his headphones on, just as I had asked. But safety was temporary. If I didn't end this tonight, tomorrow morning would bring a van and a syringe. I needed more than just the intent to commit a crime. I needed a crime that had already been committed. A felony that was stamped, signed, and sealed. Something that would hold up in federal court, not just family court. My mind drifted back to the timeline. Greg's gambling debt was over $200,000. He had been desperate for months. 3 months ago, he had volunteered to drive down to Sarasota to check on my vacation home. He said he wanted to fix some roof tiles after a storm. I remembered thinking it was a rare act of kindness. I walked over to the small desk in the corner of the room. I unlocked the bottom drawer where I kept my old files. I pulled out the folder for the Florida property. The deed was there. The house was paid off. It had been free and clear for 10 years. A prime asset sitting there worth $500,000. A perfect piggy bank for a desperate man with access to my filing cabinet. I sat down on the edge of the bed and picked up the burner phone. My hands were steady. The rage I felt earlier had crystallized into a cold, hard focus. I was back on the job. I dialed the number for First Sunshine Bank in Sarasota. I knew they held the original title before I paid it off. If Greg had taken out a loan, he would have gone there. It was the path of least resistance. The phone rang twice. An automated system answered, asking for a department. I keyed in the extension for loan servicing. A woman answered. Her voice was cheerful, professional. First Sunshine Bank Loan Servicing, this is Sarah speaking. How can I help you today? I cleared my throat. I pitched my voice slightly higher, adding a nasal whine to the vowels. I had listened to Greg complain about his life for 5 years. I knew his cadence better than he did. Hi, Sarah. This is Greg Bennett. I am calling about the Wells mortgage. I just wanted to check the balance and make sure the last payment went through. My father-in-law is getting anxious about it. I held my breath. This was Social Engineering 101. Act entitled, Act Board, and provide just enough information to seem legitimate. One moment, Mr. Bennett, let me pull up the file. Can you verify the property address and the last 4 digits of the Social Security number on file? I gave her the address. Then I gave her my Social Security number. Greg had access to all of it. He did my taxes last year, claiming he wanted to help. The fox guarding the henhouse. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I have the file here. There was a pause, the sound of typing. Each keystroke felt like a hammer hitting a nail. Okay, I see the account. The loan for $150,000 originated 90 days ago. The payment for this month has been posted. The current balance is $149,000. The air left my lungs. There it was. He hadn't just thought about it. He had done it. He had taken out $150,000 against my house, my sanctuary, the place where I planned to spend my winters. $150,000, I repeated, keeping my voice casual, though my blood was boiling. Right. And just to confirm for my records, that was dispersed to the joint account, correct? Yes, sir. The wire transfer to the account ending in 409. That was Greg's personal account, the one he used for his gambling. And Sarah, one last thing. My father-in-law, Harrison, he is a stickler for paperwork. He wants to make sure his signature on the promissory note was clear. He worries his handwriting is getting shaky. I heard the smile in her voice. She had no idea she was speaking to the victim of a massive fraud. Oh, tell him not to worry. I am looking at the digital scan right now. His signature is perfectly legible, and the notary stamp is clear too. Everything looks standard. A notary. That meant Greg had either bribed someone or he had brought in an imposter to pose as me. Thank you, Sarah, I said. You have been very helpful. I hung up the phone. I stared at the blank screen. It wasn't just theft. It was bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft. And because the transaction crossed state lines involving a federally insured bank in Florida while we were in Connecticut, it was a federal offense. I did the math in my head. Bank fraud carries a maximum sentence of 30 years. Aggravated identity theft adds a mandatory minimum of 2 years. Greg wasn't looking at a slap on the wrist. He was looking at decades in a federal penitentiary. And Victoria, she had to know. You don't spend $150,000 without your spouse noticing unless you are in on it, or unless the money disappeared into a black hole of gambling debts immediately. Either way, they were finished. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The man looking back at me wasn't a victim anymore. He wasn't a frail old man with dementia. He was the executioner. I touched the bandage on my cheek. The pain was gone, replaced by a cold certainty. Okay, Greg, I whispered to the empty room. You wanted my money. You wanted my house. You wanted my life. I smiled. It was a terrifying smile, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. You are not just going to lose your inheritance, son. You are going to lose your freedom. You are going to lose the right to walk down the street. You are going to lose the right to watch your son grow up. I checked my watch. 5:30. The sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows across the floor. It was time. I put the burner phone back in its hiding place. I checked my pocket to make sure the recording device was secure and the batteries were fresh. I smoothed down my shirt. I walked to the door and unlocked it. The click was loud in the quiet house. I stepped out into the hallway. I could smell the faint scent of Victoria's perfume lingering in the air. I could hear the muffled sound of the television set from the living room. They were probably relaxing, drinking my wine, waiting for the moment they could force the pen into my hand. Let them relax, let them feel safe. It would make the fall that much harder. I walked past the living room without looking in. I headed straight for the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator and pulled out the beef tenderloin I had bought yesterday. It was a beautiful cut of meat, expensive and tender. Perfect for beef Wellington. I placed it on the cutting board. Then I reached for the knife block. I pulled out my chef's knife. 8 inches of high-carbon stainless steel. I had sharpened it just last week. I ran my thumb lightly across the blade. It caught the ridges of my fingerprint. Razor sharp. I started to trim the fat from the meat. The rhythm was soothing. Slice, pull, slice, pull. Tonight I wasn't just cooking dinner. I was preparing a lesson in morality, a lesson in consequences. I heard footsteps approaching the kitchen. It was Greg. "Hey, Harrison," he said, leaning against the doorframe. His voice was casual, but I could hear the underlying tension. "Making dinner, huh?" I didn't look up. I kept slicing the meat, my movements precise and controlled. "Yes, Greg," I said calmly. "Beef Wellington. It is a celebratory meal." He laughed. A nervous sound. "Celebrating what?" "The new arrangement I stopped cutting." I looked up at him. I looked at the man who had stolen $150,000 from me. The man who planned to drug me and throw me in a state facility. "Celebrating the truth, Greg," I said. "The truth always comes out eventually. Doesn't it?" He frowned, unsure how to take that. "Yeah, sure. Whatever you say, Harrison. Just make sure it is ready by 7. We have business to attend to." He walked away. I looked back at the meat. "Oh, it will be ready, Greg. It will be the most memorable meal of your life." I picked up the knife again and went back to work. The trap was set. The evidence was gathered. Now all I had to do was serve it. I stood before the kitchen island like a general surveying a battlefield, but my weapons were culinary. On the heavy wooden cutting board lay the center-cut beef tenderloin. It was a magnificent piece of meat costing more than what I used to spend on groceries in a month, back when I was just starting out. It was red and raw and completely at my mercy. I had already prepared the duxelle, the mixture of finely chopped mushrooms, shallots, and herbs sautéed in butter until they were reduced to a rich, dark paste. The puff pastry was thawing on the counter. Beef Wellington is not a dish you cook when you are in a hurry. It requires patience. It requires precision. It requires the ability to wrap things up tightly so that nothing escapes, just like a good criminal investigation. Victoria walked into the kitchen. The clicking of her heels on the tile was a sound that used to make me smile, thinking my little girl was home. Now it sounded like a countdown. She stopped in the doorway, staring at the spread of ingredients. She looked confused. In her narrative, I was supposed to be in my room, trembling and confused, possibly drooling on myself, waiting for her to take over. Seeing me commanding the kitchen with the focus of a master chef did not fit her script. "Dad." "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "I thought you were resting. You are supposed to be saving your strength for tonight." I did not look up from the beef. I picked up the salt cellar and began to season the meat, turning it with my hands. The coarse grains felt rough against my skin. "I am resting." "Victoria," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Cooking relaxes me. You know that. And tonight is special. I wanted to make something memorable, a farewell dinner." She froze. I could feel the tension radiating off her. "Farewell," she repeated, her voice pitching higher. "What do you mean, farewell? You're not going anywhere, Dad. We talked about this. You are just signing some papers to help us manage things." I caught my mistake. Or rather, I let her think it was a mistake. I let out a small chuckle, the dry laugh of an old man who has lost his train of thought. "Oh, silly me," I said, shaking my head. "I meant a celebration dinner." "Of course. A celebration. I am just so relieved that you are going to take this burden off my shoulders. The money, the accounts. It is all too much for me now. My mind, well, it gets so foggy." I saw her shoulders relax. She bought it. She was so desperate for the money. She would believe anything that cleared the path to it. "Right," she said, stepping closer, eyeing the expensive beef. "A celebration." "That is nice, Dad. What are you making?" "Beef Wellington," I said. "Your mother's favorite. And yours too, if I recall. Before you started that gluten-free diet or whatever it is you are doing now." She rolled her eyes. "I can eat it just this once," she said. "But Dad, we need to eat early. Greg has business to attend to later, and the notary is coming at 8. "Greg has business." I almost laughed. Greg's business was trying not to get his kneecaps broken by the mob. "Don't worry," I said. "It will be ready." I reached for the honing steel and my chef's knife. This was my favorite knife. Japanese steel, perfectly balanced. I had bought it in Tokyo 20 years ago during a fraud investigation involving a shipping conglomerate. I held the steel in my left hand and the knife in my right. I began to sharpen it. Shing, shing, shing. The sound was rhythmic and metallic, cutting through the air of the kitchen. It was a violent sound disguised as a domestic chore. Greg wandered in, drawn by the noise, or perhaps checking to make sure the golden goose hadn't flown the coop. He was wearing a polo shirt that was too tight around the middle, and he looked sweaty despite the air conditioning. He stopped next to Victoria, watching me. Shing, shing. "That is a lot of effort," Harrison Gregg said, nervously eyeing the blade. "Why didn't we just order pizza?" "Pizza," I said, not breaking my rhythm. "You don't serve pizza when you are signing over a multi-million-dollar estate, Greg. You serve something with substance, something that bleeds." Greg swallowed hard. He looked at the knife flashing back and forth. For a second, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He sensed something was wrong. The predator in him smelled a trap, but his greed was too strong. He was $200,000 in the hole, and I was his only way out. He pushed the fear down. "Right," he said, forcing a smile. "Classy. I like it." I set the honing steel down with a heavy clatter. I held the knife up, inspecting the edge under the recessed lighting. It gleamed wicked and bright. I looked at Greg. I looked right through him. "I need a favor," I said. He stiffened. "What kind of favor?" "I want to invite a friend tonight," I said. "A witness." Victoria immediately stepped in. "No, Dad," she said firmly. "No guests. This is a private family matter. We don't want outsiders knowing our business. Besides, the notary will be here. That is enough." I sighed and put the knife down on the board. I let my shoulders slump, looking defeated. "It is just Mr. Reynolds," I said, my voice turning whiny and pathetic. "You know him. My chess partner. He lives down the street. He is a good man." Victoria narrowed her eyes. "Reynolds, that old guy with the cane, the one who wears the hearing aids." "That is him," I said. "Poor old soul. He is deaf as a post without those aids, and half-blind too. But he is my oldest friend. I want someone from my generation there, to toast with. It would make me feel better about signing everything away. If I can't have him, well, I just don't know if I feel up to signing tonight." I let the threat hang there. It was a gentle threat wrapped in the guise of a senile old man's stubbornness. Victoria and Greg exchanged a look. They held a silent conversation. I knew exactly what they were thinking. Reynolds was harmless. He was geriatric. If he was deaf and blind, he wouldn't know what he was signing or witnessing anyway. He was a prop, a pacifier to get the baby to take his medicine. Fine, Victoria sighed. Invite him, but tell him to come at 7 sharp, and he doesn't stay late. Once dinner is over, he leaves. Thank you, Princess, I said, smiling at her. You are a good daughter. She didn't catch the sarcasm. She was too busy texting, probably telling her creditors that the money was secure. Go get ready, I told them. I need to focus. This pastry is delicate. They left the kitchen, leaving me alone with the meat and the knife. I waited until I heard the television go on in the living room. Then I moved. I prepared the beef, searing it in the hot pan until it was brown and crusted. The smell of cooking meat filled the house, savory and rich. I wrapped it in the prosciutto and the mushroom mixture, then encased it in the puff pastry, sealing the edges with an egg wash. It looked perfect. A golden coffin for the tenderloin. I put it in the oven and set the timer. 40 minutes. I went back to my room to dress. I shaved carefully, avoiding the bandage on my cheek. I combed my gray hair. I put on my best suit, a charcoal gray wool that I used to wear to court when I was testifying. It was a little loose on me now, but it still commanded respect. I stood in front of the mirror and buttoned my crisp white dress shirt. Then I reached into my pocket and took out the device. It was tiny, no bigger than a dime. A high-definition camera and microphone disguised as a black shirt button. I had bought it years ago from a private investigator friend and kept it for a rainy day. It was raining now. It was pouring. I popped the second button off my shirt and replaced it with the device. I secured the battery pack on the inside of the shirt, taping it to my chest so it wouldn't shift. I tested the connection on my phone. The image was crystal clear. The audio picked up the sound of my own breathing. I adjusted my tie. I looked at the man in the mirror. He didn't look like a victim. He didn't look like a confused pensioner. He looked like an agent about to go undercover in a hostile environment. Tonight, every word they said would be recorded. Every threat, every admission of guilt, every lie. I was going to serve them the finest meal they had ever eaten, and while they chewed, I was going to build the cage that would hold them for the next 10 years. I checked the time. 6:30. Mr. Reynolds would be arriving soon. Only it wasn't the Mr. Reynolds they were expecting. My chess partner was indeed named Reynolds, but he wasn't a deaf old retiree. He was Captain James Reynolds of the State Police Precinct 4. And he wasn't coming alone. I walked back out to the kitchen. The smell of the beef Wellington was intoxicating. It smelled like victory. I set the table in the dining room, the good china, the crystal wine glasses, the heavy silver cutlery. I placed 3 settings, one for me at the head of the table, one for Victoria to my right, one for Greg to my left. And then I set a 4th place opposite me, for the witness. I poured the wine into a decanter, letting it breathe. It was a vintage Cabernet, expensive and complex. A waste on them, really, but necessary for the theater. I heard Victoria coming down the stairs. She had dressed up too. She was wearing a black dress that she probably bought with my money. She looked beautiful and dangerous. "It smells good, Dad," she said, walking into the dining room. She looked at the table. "Fancy." "Nothing but the best for my family," I said, pulling out her chair for her. Greg came down a moment later, wearing a blazer over his t-shirt, trying to look respectable. He eyed the wine greedily. "Can we drink yet?" he asked, reaching for a glass. "Not yet," I said, slapping his hand lightly. "We wait for our guest." "Manners, Greg." He grumbled but pulled his hand back. The doorbell rang. It was exactly 7 o'clock. "Right on time," I said. Victoria sighed, checking her watch. Okay, let's get this over with. I will get it. It is just old Reynolds. I hope he didn't bring his walker. She walked to the front door, her heels clicking on the foyer tiles. I stood at the head of the table, my hand resting on the back of my chair. My heart was beating slow and steady. The camera on my chest was blinking a tiny invisible red light. I heard the door open. "Hello, Mr. Reynolds." Victoria's voice was loud and condescending, the tone you use with a child or an idiot. "You are right on time. My dad is in the dining room. Let me help you with—" Her voice trailed off. It just stopped dead. There was a silence. A long, heavy silence that stretched from the front door all the way to the dining room. Greg frowned. "What is going on?" he muttered, standing up. Then I heard a voice. It wasn't the wheezing voice of an 80-year-old man. It was a baritone voice, commanding and authoritative. "Good evening, Mrs. Bennet. I believe we have a dinner reservation." Greg's face went white. He knew that voice. He had grown up in this town. He knew exactly who that voice belonged to. It wasn't a deaf old man. It was Captain James Reynolds. And from the heavy footstep that followed him, he had brought the entire department. I stood up. My knees didn't hurt anymore. I buttoned my jacket. "Showtime," I whispered to Greg. I walked toward the foyer, ready to serve the final course. Victoria smoothed the silk of her dress and checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. She forced the corners of her mouth upward into a welcoming smile. It was the same smile she used when she was trying to sell a house with a cracked foundation, or when she was asking me for money to cover a credit card bill. It was a mask of polite condescension. She thought she was opening the door to an old man with hearing aids and a cane. She thought she was about to charm a witness into signing away my life. She reached for the brass handle. I watched from the dining room archway, my hand resting near the hidden button on my chest. "I hope he wipes his feet," she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear. "I just had these carpets cleaned." She pulled the door open with a flourish, ready to shout a greeting for the benefit of deaf ears. "Hello, Mr. Reynolds." She began, her voice pitched loud and slow. "So glad you could." The words died in her throat. The fake smile slid off her face like grease. Standing on the front porch was not a frail retiree. It was a wall of blue uniform. Captain James Reynolds stood 6'3", with silver hair cut in a military buzz and a face carved from granite. He was wearing his full dress uniform, the gold badge on his chest, catching the light from the foyer chandelier. Rain was falling behind him, glistening on the brim of his hat. To his right stood Patricia O'Connell, my lawyer. She was wearing a trench coat over her sharp business suit, holding a thick leather briefcase that I knew contained the end of Victoria's world. Behind them were two uniformed officers, their hands resting casually near their belts, their eyes scanning the hallway with professional detachment. Victoria stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her throat. She looked like she had seen a ghost. In a way, she had. She was seeing the ghost of the consequences she thought she had outrun. Can I help you, officers?" She stammered, her voice trembling. "Is there an emergency? Did something happen in the neighborhood?" Captain Reynolds did not smile. He did not offer a polite greeting. He took off his hat and tucked it under his arm. "Good evening, Mrs. Bennet," he said, his voice deep and rumbling like thunder. "We are not here for the neighborhood. We are here for this house." Victoria blinked rapidly, trying to process the scene. Her eyes darted from the captain to Patty, then back to the officers. Denial was her first defense mechanism. "I think you have the wrong address," she said, forcing a nervous laugh. "This is the Wells residence. We are having a private family dinner. My father he is not well. He is confused. If he called you, I am so sorry. He has dementia. He doesn't know what he is doing." She was trying to spin the narrative before they even stepped inside. She was trying to paint me as the unreliable narrator. Reynolds stepped over the threshold. The two officers followed him, forcing Victoria to retreat further into the hallway. The air in the house changed instantly. It went from warm and domestic to cold and official. "We are not at the wrong address," Mrs. Bennet Reynolds said, stepping onto the expensive Persian rug Victoria had bought with my money. "And we did not receive a distress call from a confused man. We received an invitation." "An invitation," Victoria whispered. "Yes." Patty stepped forward. Her heels clicked sharply on the floor. "Mr. Wells invited us to dinner. He said there was a matter of urgent legal business regarding his estate. And since I represent his interests, I thought it best to bring some security, given the nature of the assets involved." Victoria looked at Patty with pure hatred. She recognized her. Patty had been my lawyer for 30 years. She was the one who had set up the trust funds Victoria had drained. "My father is not competent to invite anyone anywhere," Victoria snapped, her fear turning into aggression. "I have the medical power of attorney, or I will have it tonight. He is sick. You are trespassing. I want you to leave. Now." Reynolds stopped. He looked down at her. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "We are not leaving, ma'am," he said calmly. "And if you attempt to obstruct us, we will have a very different conversation. Now, where is Mr. Wells?" "I am right here, James." I spoke from the archway of the dining room. My voice was clear, strong. I didn't pitch it up. I didn't slur my words. I stripped away the tremor I had been faking for 6 months. Victoria whirled around. She looked at me, and for the first time she saw the man standing there. Not the checkbook, not the burden. The man. "Dad," she breathed. "What did you do, I ignored her. I looked at the captain. "Come in, James. The roast is cooling, and I believe we have a lot to discuss before dessert." I turned back to the dining table. Greg was still sitting there, his wine glass halfway to his mouth. He had heard everything. He had heard the heavy boots on the floor. He had heard the authority in Reynolds' voice. Greg knew Reynolds. Everyone who grew up in this town knew him. Reynolds was the man who had arrested Greg's brother for grand theft auto 10 years ago. Reynolds was the man who didn't take bribes and didn't look the other way. Greg looked at me. His face was the color of old ash. His hand started to shake. The wine in his glass rippled, creating tiny red waves. "Harrison," he whispered, "that is the state police. Why is the state police in our hallway?" I walked to the head of the table. I didn't sit down. I stood tall. My spine was straight, my shoulders back. The arthritis pain was gone, banished by the adrenaline of the hunt. I looked at my son-in-law, the man who had forged my signature, the man who had sold my future to pay for his vices. I reached out and picked up my own wine glass. I took a sip, savoring the oak and the tannins. "They are here for the signing." "Greg," I said softly, "you wanted witnesses, right? You wanted everything to be legal. Well, it doesn't get more legal than this." Captain Reynolds walked into the dining room. He filled the space. He looked at the candlelit table, the fine china, the half-eaten beef Wellington. Then he looked at Greg. "Hello," Gregory Reynolds said. "It has been a long time. I hear you have been busy." Greg made a noise in the back of his throat. A strangled whimper. His hand convulsed. The crystal wine glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the table edge first, then shattered on the floor. The sound was explosive in the quiet room. Red wine splashed everywhere. It soaked into the white lace tablecloth, spreading like a gunshot wound. It splattered onto the pristine cream carpet, staining it the color of blood. Greg didn't move. He just stared at the broken glass, at the red stain spreading across the floor. "Oops," I said coldly, looking down at the mess. "That is a shame. That carpet was expensive, but I suppose you won't have to worry about cleaning it up." Victoria ran into the room. She saw the broken glass. She saw the police surrounding the table. She saw me standing at the head of it like a judge on the bench. "Dad, stop this," she screamed. "Send them away. Tell them you are confused. Tell them it is a mistake." I looked at her. I reached up and unbuttoned my collar. I pulled the tiny camera from my shirt and set it on the table next to the roast. The red light was still blinking, recording everything. "There is no mistake, Victoria," I said. "The only mistake was thinking I was weak. The only mistake was thinking you could steal my life and I would thank you for it." I motioned to Patty. She stepped forward and placed the thick leather briefcase on the table right on top of the wine stain. She clicked the latches open. The sound was loud and final, like the closing of a cell door. "Have a seat, Victoria," I said, pointing to her chair. "Captain Reynolds, take a seat." I leaned forward, my hands resting on the table, looking from my daughter to my son-in-law. "Dinner is served. And now we are going to talk about who is paying the bill." The silence in the dining room did not last long. It was shattered by the sound of a chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. Greg scrambled backward, away from the table, away from his wife, and away from the damning evidence sitting next to the roast beef. His face was slick with sweat, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped rat looking for a sewer grate. "It was her idea," Greg screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal. He pointed a shaking finger at Victoria. "Do not look at me like that, Harrison. I swear to God. I just wanted to ask you for a loan, a simple loan." But she said no. She said you were too stingy. She said you were taking too long to die. Victoria turned on him, her face contorted in disbelief. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The betrayal was absolute. "I am innocent," Greg babbled on, turning toward Captain Reynolds, holding his hands up in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "I will tell you everything. I will testify. I have the emails. I have the texts where she talked about the facility. She called it the warehouse. She said once he was in there, we could sell the house in a month. Just do not arrest me, please. I am scared of prison. I cannot go to prison." "You coward," Victoria hissed. The word came out like the strike of a snake. "You spineless, pathetic leech." She looked around the room. Her eyes landed on the small black device sitting on the table. The recorder. The size of a button, but heavy enough to sink her entire life. It was the only thing standing between her and freedom, or so she thought in her panic-stricken mind. She moved before anyone could stop her. With a guttural scream of pure rage, Victoria lunged across the table. She didn't care about the fine china or the crystal glasses. She swept them aside with her arm, sending them crashing to the floor in a shower of glass and porcelain. She reached for the recorder, her fingernails clawing at the tablecloth, dragging the centerpiece with her. "Give it to me," she shrieked. "Give it to me, you old fool." She wasn't looking at me with love. She wasn't looking at me with regret. She was looking at me with the eyes of a stranger who wanted to destroy me. She grabbed the lapel of my jacket, trying to shake me, trying to get to the device, but she never made it. Captain Reynolds moved with a speed that belied his size. He intercepted her in 2 strides. He didn't strike her. He simply grabbed her wrist and twisted it behind her back, using her own momentum against her. Victoria cried out in pain as she was spun around and pressed face first into the wall next to the china cabinet. "That is enough." Reynolds barked, his voice leaving no room for argument. He pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic ratchet sound as they tightened around her wrists was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It sounded like the finality of a coffin lid closing. "Victoria Wells. Bennett. You are under arrest," Reynolds announced, his tone flat and professional. "You are being charged with domestic assault in the first-degree elder abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "Get off me," Victoria screamed, struggling uselessly against the steel cuffs. "You are hurting me, Daddy. Tell them to stop. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. I am your daughter." One of the other officers had moved to Greg. He didn't fight. He collapsed. He slumped against the wall, weeping openly, offering his wrists to the officer, as if begging for it to be over. I stood by the table, my hand resting on the back of my chair to steady myself. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a heavy, suffocating sorrow. I watched the officer pat down my son-in-law. I watched the captain hold my daughter against the wall. This was the little girl I had carried on my shoulders at the zoo. This was the girl I had taught to ride a bike, holding the back of the seat until she found her balance. This was the woman I had walked down the aisle beaming with pride, thinking I had done a good job. I walked over to where Reynolds was holding her. She stopped struggling when she saw me approach. She looked up at me, her hair messy, her mascara running down her face. She looked small. She looked young. For a second, I saw the child she used to be. "Daddy," she whimpered. "Please. I am sorry. I won't do it again. Just tell them to let me go. We can fix this." I looked down at her. I felt a tear track down my own face, stinging the cut on my cheek. "I cannot fix this, Victoria," I said softly. "I can fix a broken toy. I can fix a tax audit. But I cannot fix a broken soul." I leaned in closer so only she could hear me over the sound of Greg's sobbing. "I taught you how to walk, Victoria. I taught you how to speak. I taught you how to read, and how to drive, and how to balance a checkbook. I gave you everything I had." I paused, taking a breath that felt like inhaling broken glass. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot to teach you how to be a human being. And that is my greatest failure." She stared at me, and the pleading in her eyes turned to ice. She realized then that I wasn't going to save her. The bank of Dad was closed forever. "I hate you," she spat. "I wish you had died." I nodded slowly, accepting her hatred as the price of my survival. "I know," I said. "That is why you are going to jail." Reynolds nodded to his officers. "Take them out." The officers grabbed Greg and Victoria by the arms and marched them toward the front door. I followed them. I had to see it through to the end. Patty walked beside me, her hand hovering near my elbow, ready to catch me if I fell. But I didn't fall. We walked out onto the front porch. The night air was cool and crisp. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the chaotic dance of red and blue lights. There were 3 patrol cars parked in my driveway and on the street. Their lights flashed rhythmically, painting the neighborhood in strokes of emergency. And then I saw the neighbors. They were there, standing on their lawns, peering through their curtains, gathered in small clusters on the sidewalk. Mrs. Gable from next door was clutching her robe tight around her. Mr. Henderson from across the street was holding his dog's leash, watching with wide eyes. Victoria saw them too. For a woman who lived her entire life for appearances, this was a fate worse than prison. This was social death. She tried to duck her head to hide her face, but it was too late. The spotlight on the police cruiser swept over her, illuminating her handcuffs, her ruined makeup, her shame. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Everyone is watching." Yes, Victoria, I thought. They are. They are seeing the truth behind the Hermes bag and the country club membership. They are seeing the reality you tried so hard to hide. The officers guided them into the back of separate patrol cars. Greg stumbled as he got in, looking like a man walking to the gallows. Victoria had to be pushed down to protect her head. I stood on the porch, watching. The heavy oak door was still open behind me, revealing the wreckage of the dinner party. The candles had burned low. The wine was soaking into the carpet. Reynolds walked down the steps and stopped by the driver's window of the lead car. He said something to the officer inside, then looked back at me. He tipped his hat. A silent salute from one soldier to another. Then he got in his car. The sirens didn't wail. They didn't need to. The convoy pulled away, slowly rolling down the quiet suburban street like a funeral procession. I watched the taillights fade into the distance until they turned the corner and vanished. The neighbors lingered for a moment, whispering, pointing at my house. Then, one by one, they went back inside their warm homes. I was alone. I turned back to the open door. The house was empty now. The toxicity had been surgically removed, but the wound was still fresh and bleeding. I stepped inside and closed the door. I turned the lock. The click echoed through the empty hallway. I leaned my forehead against the wood and closed my eyes. I was tired. So incredibly tired. But then I heard a sound from upstairs. A small creak of floorboards. Leo. I pushed myself off the door. I wasn't done yet. I had one more job to do. The most important job of the night. I walked to the stairs. My legs felt heavy, but I forced them to move. I climbed the steps one by one. I walked down the hallway past the empty master bedroom, past the guest room that Greg and Victoria had occupied. I stopped at the door at the end of the hall. I saw the light shining from underneath. I raised my hand and knocked softly. 3 times. The secret signal. Leo. I called out, my voice gentle. It is Grandpa. The bad guys are gone. You can open the door now. I waited, listening for the sound of the lock turning. I prepared myself to be the rock he needed. The nightmare was over. Now the healing had to begin. I barely had time to let the relief of the arrest settle in my bones before the doorbell rang again. It was not the authoritative pounding of the police this time. It was a sharp, businesslike ring. The kind of ring that means paperwork and protocol. I stood up from where I was kneeling next to Leo. He flinched, grabbing my sleeve. His eyes were wide and terrified. He thought the police were coming back. He thought they were coming for him. Stay here, Leo. I said, keeping my voice calm even though my heart had started to hammer against my ribs again. Do not open the door. Just wait on the bed. I walked out of the room and closed the door gently. I moved to the landing and looked down into the foyer. Patty was already there. She hadn't left. She knew this was coming. She was standing by the front door, her briefcase open again, holding a thick sheaf of documents with blue legal binders. She looked up at me and nodded. Her face was grim. It is Child Protective Services, Harrison, she said softly. Standard procedure. When both custodial parents are arrested on felony charges, the state steps in immediately to secure the welfare of the minor. I walked down the stairs. My knees were aching now, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind the inflammation of old age. But I forced myself to walk straight. I could not look weak. Not now. Patty opened the door. Standing on the porch was a woman in a beige raincoat holding a clipboard. She looked tired. She looked like she had seen too many broken homes and too many crying children. Behind her was a generic sedan with the state seal on the door. Mr. Wells, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. My name is Janet Miller. I am with the Department of Children and Families. I have been notified by Captain Reynolds that Mr. and Mrs. Bennett have been taken into custody. I blocked her path. I didn't mean to be aggressive, but instinct took over. I was the grandfather. I was the protector. I know who you are, Ms. Miller, I said, and I know why you are here. She looked at me, sympathetic but firm. Then you know I need to take custody of Leo Bennett. I need to transport him to an emergency foster placement until a hearing can be scheduled, usually within 72 hours. Please, sir, do not make this difficult. It is traumatic enough for the child. Traumatic. She used the word like a clinical term. She didn't know what trauma was. Trauma was a 10-year-old boy hiding in the bushes, drawing pictures of a mental asylum, because his mother told him his grandfather is going to be disappeared. You are not taking him, I said. My voice was low, dangerous. He is not going into the system. He is not going to a stranger's house. He is staying right here. Ms. Miller sighed. She reached for her radio, probably to call the officers back. Mr. Wells, I understand you are the grandfather, but you do not have legal standing right now. The parents are the guardians and they are incarcerated. The state is the default guardian. If you resist, I will have to. Patty stepped between us. She was like a shark in the water, smooth and lethal. She thrust the blue-bound document into Ms. Miller's hands. Actually, Janet, Patty said, her voice cutting through the tension. The state is not the default guardian, not in this case. Ms. Miller frowned, adjusting her glasses. She looked down at the paperwork. What is this? That is an emergency ex parte order for temporary custody signed by Judge Holloway at 5:45 this evening, Patty explained. We filed an emergency petition based on imminent danger and parental unfitness. Ms. Miller flipped through the pages. Her eyebrows shot up. Gambling debts, she read aloud. Foreclosure risk, threat of physical harm from organized crime. It is all documented, Patty said, pointing to the exhibits attached to the order. Mr. Bennett has over $200,000 in gambling debts held by individuals known to law enforcement. There have been credible threats against the safety of the household. Mrs. Bennett is complicit in a conspiracy to defraud a senior citizen and has demonstrated a willingness to use chemical restraints on a vulnerable adult. Patty paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. The judge agreed that placing the child in foster care would be detrimental, but returning him to the parents is impossible. However, Mr. Wells here owns the home. He has no criminal record. He is a retired forensic accountant with a substantial pension and assets. He is the stability in this child's life. The order grants him immediate temporary sole custody pending the full hearing next week. Ms. Miller read the judge's signature. She checked the date. She checked the seal. It was ironclad. Patty had outmaneuvered the system before the system even knew the game had started. Miss Miller let out a breath she seemed to have been holding. Her shoulders dropped. She wasn't the enemy, she was just a bureaucrat, and she was relieved she didn't have to drag a kicking, screaming child out of his home at 8 o'clock at night. All right, she said, handing the papers back to Patty. The order looks valid. Judge Holloway doesn't sign these lightly. She looked at me. Her expression softened. Mr. Wells, you understand what this means. You are responsible for him, completely. We will still need to do a home visit tomorrow. We need to interview the child. We need to make sure this environment is safe given everything that just happened here. The environment is safe, Ms. Miller, I said. The danger just left in the back of a police car. She nodded. Okay. I will note in my report that custody has been transferred per the court order. Good luck, Mr. Wells. She turned and walked out into the night. I watched her get into her sedan and drive away. The taillights faded into the dark, leaving only the quiet street. Patty closed the door and locked it. She leaned against the frame, looking exhausted. That was close, she whispered. If we hadn't gotten that signature before the offices closed. You saved us, Patty, I said. I owe you everything. You owe me a very large billable hour, she joked weakly. But you are right, Harrison. He is safe. Just then I heard a noise from the top of the stairs. I looked up. Leo was standing there. He was wearing his pajamas now, clutching a stuffed bear he had kept hidden since he was 7. He looked small. He looked fragile. He looked like a boy who had lost his entire world in the span of 3 hours. Grandpa, he called out, his voice trembling. Who was that lady? Was she the lady for Shady Pines? He thought I was the one leaving. He thought Ms. Miller had come for me. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and opened my arms. No, Leo, I said, fighting back the tears that were burning my eyes. She wasn't here for me, and she wasn't here for you. She is gone. Everyone is gone. He ran. He didn't walk, he ran down the stairs, skipping the last 2 steps, and launched himself into my arms. I caught him, ignoring the flare of pain in my back. I held him tight. I held him like he was the only thing anchoring me to the earth. "Are Mom and Dad coming back?" he sobbed into my shoulder. "Not tonight, Leo," I whispered. "Not for a long time." He pulled back and looked at me. His eyes were red and swollen. "Is it just us?" he asked. I looked around the foyer. The house felt enormous. The shadows seemed longer. The silence was absolute. Without the tension of Victoria's scheming, without the nervous energy of Greg's gambling, the house felt like a cavern. It was cold. It was empty. But it was safe. For the first time in years, it was safe. "Yes, Leo," I said, wiping a tear from his cheek with my thumb. "It is just us. Just you and Grandpa. We are a team now." He nodded, burying his face in my chest again. "Okay," he mumbled. "I like your team, Grandpa." I looked at Patty over Leo's head. She gave me a sad smile and picked up her briefcase. She let herself out quietly, closing the door on the ruin of my family and the beginning of my new life. I stood there in the hallway, holding my grandson, listening to the grandfather clock tick away the seconds. I knew the war wasn't over. The criminal trial would be a circus. The permanent custody hearings would be brutal. Victoria would fight me from behind bars. Greg would try to make deals. The money I recovered would be eaten away by lawyers and court fees. I was 70 years old. I should be fishing. I should be reading books by the fire. Instead, I was raising a 10-year-old boy alone in a house filled with ghosts. But as I felt Leo's breathing slow down, as I felt his small heart beating against mine, I knew I had made the right choice. I had served justice. I had protected the innocent. And even though the house was cold, my heart was full. "Come on, Leo," I said softly. "Let's go make some hot chocolate. The real kind. With the marshmallows." He looked up, a tiny ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Can we put extra marshmallows in?" "We can put in as many as we want," I said. I took his hand and led him toward the kitchen, stepping over the stain on the carpet without looking down. We walked away from the wreckage and toward the stove light. The long night was just beginning, but at least we were facing it together. The weeks between the arrest and the final verdict were a different kind of war. It wasn't fought with knives or hidden cameras, but with motions, depositions, and desperate lies. I thought the arrest would break Victoria, but I underestimated her delusion. She didn't believe she belonged in a cell. She believed she was the victim of a misunderstanding, or worse, a conspiracy orchestrated by a vindictive father. I remember the bail hearing clearly. It was 10 days after the dinner. I sat in the back row of the courtroom, Patty beside me. When the bailiffs brought Victoria in, she was wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on her frame. Her roots were showing and her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing the hard lines of bitterness around her mouth. She scanned the room frantically until her eyes locked on mine. For a moment, I thought she would cry. Instead, she straightened her spine and glared at me with a look of pure venom. She whispered something to her public defender, a weary man who looked like he knew he was fighting a losing battle. Her lawyer stood up and argued that the recording was inadmissible, that I had entrapped her, that I was mentally incompetent and paranoid. He tried to paint the picture of a confused old man manipulating reality. It was a good performance, but it crumbled the moment the prosecutor played the audio file. The sound of her voice filled the courtroom, crisp and clear, discussing the chemical restraints. "Shady Pines is good. He will sleep all day." The judge, a stern woman with glasses, peered over the bench at Victoria. Her expression was one of absolute disgust. "Bail is denied," the judge ruled, slamming the gavel. "The defendant is a flight risk and a danger to the community." Victoria screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of entitlement being crushed. As they dragged her out, she didn't look at me. She looked at Greg, who was sitting at the defense table on the other side of the room. Greg didn't look back. He had already made his choice. 2 days later, I had to sit through Greg's deposition. It was part of his plea deal. He had agreed to testify against his wife in exchange for a reduced sentence. I watched from behind the one-way glass. Greg sang like a canary. He detailed everything. He told them about the forged checks, the credit cards opened in my name, the conversations with the shady doctor. He poured every ounce of blame onto Victoria, painting himself as the hapless husband bullied into crime. It was pathetic, but it was effective. He confirmed the intent to kill. He confirmed that if the drugs didn't work, they had discussed staging an accident on the stairs. Hearing it out loud, confirmed by the man I had welcomed into my family, was chilling. I wasn't just a burden to them. I was a piggy bank that they needed to smash open. The social fallout was just as brutal as the legal one. Victoria's greatest fear had always been the judgment of her peers, and now she was the main course of every gossip circle in Connecticut. The country club revoked their membership within 48 hours, citing a moral turpitude clause. The private school sent a polite but firm letter, distancing themselves from the Bennett family. Her friends, the ones she bought expensive gifts for using my money, gave interviews to the local papers, painting themselves as victims of her deception. She didn't just lose her freedom, she lost the audience she had performed for her entire adult life. Inside the courtroom, the evidence mounted like bricks in a wall. The prosecution brought in Sarah, the loan officer from Florida. She testified about the phone call, confirming that Greg had impersonated me to secure the fraudulent loan. Seeing Greg shrink in his seat as the audio recording of his nasal whining voice played for the jury was a moment of dark satisfaction. He wasn't a mastermind. He was just a thief who got caught. At home, I kept the news off. Leo didn't need to see his parents on the evening news in orange jumpsuits. But one night he asked me if he had to go to court. He was terrified they would make him choose sides. I held him and promised him that his drawing the picture of Shady Pines was all the testimony the judge needed. He would never have to step foot in that room. I took that burden on myself, just as I had taken on everything else. The final confrontation happened in the hallway of the courthouse just before the sentencing. Due to a scheduling error, the guards were moving Victoria down the corridor just as I was leaving the prosecutor's office. We stopped. There was only 10 feet between us. She was shackled at the wrists and ankles, shuffling awkwardly. She stopped and looked at me. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. "You won," she said, her voice raspy. "Are you happy now, Dad? You won. You have the money. You have the house. You have Leo. You took everything." I looked at her and I realized she still didn't get it. She still thought this was a game of winning and losing assets. "I didn't win anything, Victoria," I said, feeling a wave of exhaustion. "I lost a daughter. Leo lost a mother. Nobody won here. We just survived you." She sneered. "I hope he forgets me," she spat. "I hope he forgets I ever existed." I didn't tell her that he already had nightmares about her. I didn't tell her that he flinched when women with loud voices spoke near him. "He won't forget," I said. "But he will heal, and I will make sure he grows up to be nothing like you." The guards pushed her forward. She didn't look back. That was the last time I saw her face without the barrier of a plexiglass window. The sentencing came a week later. When the judge read out the 5-year term, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt the heavy finality of a book closing. It was done. The cancer was cut out. Now the patient had to learn to live again. The snow in Montana falls differently than it does in Connecticut. It is quieter here, heavier. It covers the world in a blanket of white silence that seems to muffle the noise of the past. It has been 6 months since the night the red and blue lights flashed in my driveway, and in that time the ringing in my ears has finally started to fade. I am sitting on the porch of a small log cabin overlooking Flathead Lake. The air is crisp and cold, biting at my nose, but it feels clean. It feels real. Inside the cabin, my grandson Leo is sleeping soundly. He doesn't have nightmares about vans coming to take me away anymore. He doesn't draw pictures of prisons. He draws mountains and fish and bears. He is healing. And so am I. The transition wasn't easy. The weeks following the arrest were a blur of courtrooms and lawyers and media trucks parked on my lawn. The trial was swift but brutal. The evidence I had gathered, the recording, the bank records, the testimony from the bank in Florida, it was all insurmountable. Greg pleaded guilty almost immediately, desperate for a deal. He got 3 years in a minimum security facility for wire fraud and identity theft. He cried when they sentenced him. He looked at me, hoping for me to intervene, hoping for the old Harrison who would write a check to fix everything. I just looked back at him and did nothing. Victoria fought. She fought until the bitter end, convinced she was the victim. She fired 3 lawyers. She screamed at the judge. In the end, the jury didn't buy her tears. They saw the video of her slapping me. They heard the recording of her planning to chemically restrain her own father. The judge called her conduct depraved. He sentenced her to 5 years in a federal penitentiary for elder abuse and conspiracy. I did not visit her before she was transferred. I did not say goodbye. I had already said goodbye to the daughter I thought I had that night at the dinner table. After the sentencing, I made one final decision. A decision that confused Patty and infuriated my friends, but felt right to me. I sold the house in Connecticut. I sold the furniture, the art, the wine collection, everything that carried the stench of their greed. It sold for $2.8 million. I took $200,000 of that money, and I paid off Greg's gambling debt. Patty told me I was crazy. She said I didn't owe them a dime, but I wasn't doing it for them. I did it because I didn't want my grandson's father to be murdered in prison over a debt. I did it so that when Greg eventually gets out, he starts at 0, not at negative 200,000, with a hitman on his tail. It was my final act of kindness, my final transaction with the Bennett family. The rest of the money went into an irrevocable trust for Leo, untouchable by his parents, managed by a firm that specializes in protecting assets from predators. Then we packed up my old truck and we drove west. We drove until the buildings got smaller and the sky got bigger. We landed here in a town where nobody knows who Harrison Wells is. Nobody knows about the scandal or the forensic accountant who arrested his own children. Here I am, just Harry, the guy who opened a small tax consultancy on Main Street. I help local business owners with their payroll. I help farmers with their deductions. It is simple work, honest work. I don't chase criminals anymore. I just balance the books. I stood up and walked down the steps of the porch toward the frozen lake. The ice was thick enough to walk on now. I saw a small figure sitting on a bucket near the edge of the dock, bundled up in a bright red parka. Leo was holding a small fishing rod, staring intently at a hole in the ice. "Any luck?" I asked, my breath puffing out in white clouds. He looked up. His cheeks were rosy, his eyes bright. "Not yet, Grandpa. But I think there is a big one down there. I can feel it." I smiled and sat down on the bucket next to him. We sat in companionable silence for a long time, watching the line twitch. It was a peace I never thought I would find again. Grandpa Leo asked without looking away from the hole. "Yeah, buddy. Do you miss them, Mom and Dad?" The question hung in the cold air. I looked out at the vast expanse of white ice. I thought about the silence in the house after they were arrested. I thought about the years of manipulation, the lies, the slow erosion of trust. I took a deep breath. I wanted to be honest with him. He deserved the truth. "I miss who they used to be, Leo," I said carefully. "I miss the memories of them. I miss the idea of them. But the people they became, the people who hurt us, no, I don't miss them." He nodded slowly, absorbing this. "I miss them sometimes," he admitted, his voice small. "But I like it better here. It is quiet. And Mom isn't screaming about money all the time. and you are safe." I put my arm around his shoulders, pulling him close. "I am safe because of you, Leo. You saved me. Never forget that." We caught 2 trout that afternoon. We cleaned them together in the kitchen, just like my father taught me. We fried them in butter with lemon and herbs, and ate them at the small wooden table by the fire. It wasn't beef Wellington. It wasn't served on fine china, but it was the best meal I had eaten in years, because it was paid for with peace of mind. After dinner, Leo went to bed. I stayed up to bank the fire. As I was tidying up the desk, I saw the mail that I had brought in earlier and ignored. On top of the pile was a plain white envelope. It had the stamp of the Danbury Federal Correctional Institution. It was a letter from Victoria. My hand hovered over it. I recognized her handwriting. It was spidery and frantic. I knew what was inside without opening it. It would be pages of justification. It would be guilt trips. It would be requests for money for the commissary. Or maybe it would be a genuine apology born of rock bottom. I picked up the envelope. It felt light. I thought about opening it. I thought about reading her words, letting her voice back into my head, letting her try to manipulate me one last time. Then I looked at the photo on the mantelpiece. It was a picture of me and Leo standing in front of the mountains holding our fishing poles, smiling, like we had won the lottery. We had won. We had won our lives back. I walked over to the fireplace. The logs were glowing red, radiating a fierce heat. I didn't hesitate. I didn't second-guess myself. I tossed the unopened envelope onto the embers. For a second, nothing happened. Then the corner of the paper turned brown. A small flame licked at the edge. The paper curled, blackening as the heat consumed it. The handwriting disappeared. The words turned to smoke. I watched it burn until there was nothing left but gray ash floating up the chimney into the cold Montana night. I dusted off my hands. The past was gone. Burnt. Finished. I turned off the lamp and walked down the hall to check on Leo one last time. I stood in his doorway listening to his steady breathing. "Good night, Leo," I whispered. I went to my own room and lay down. For the first time in 20 years, I fell asleep the moment my head hit the pillow, and I didn't dream of anything at all. The most painful yet valuable lesson I learned is that family is defined by respect and character, not just blood. Sometimes a father's greatest act of love is not blind forgiveness, but bravely setting boundaries to stop evil even when the perpetrator is his own child. I chose justice not for revenge, but to protect my innocent grandson's future. Money can be lost and earned again, but dignity once lost can never be bought back. True peace only comes when we dare to live with a clear conscience. If my journey to find justice and protect my grandson touched your heart, please hit like and subscribe to the channel right now. Have you ever had to stand up against family to do what is right? Share your story in the comments below. I would love to hear and connect with you.